So this week we're going to solve quadratic equations by factoring, and we've been working on factoring for several weeks now. So what we're going to do is mix all that different type of factoring together and put them with equations and actually solve. So we have three steps that we're going to follow. The first step is to set the equation equal to 0. The second step is to factor, which we've been doing for several weeks. And the third step is to set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So let's look at this first example here. So it says set the equation equal to 0, and notice that's what we have. We have an equation equal to 0. Our second step says to factor, which this one's already factored. So remember when we factor a quadratic equation, this is what our equation ends up looking like. So this is already factored. So what we're going to do for step 3 is we're going to take each one of these factors. The first one's x plus 4. We're going to set it equal to 0. And then we're going to take the second one, which was x minus 2, and set it equal to 0. And then we're just going to solve these. So the first one, we'll subtract 4, and our answer is x equals negative 4. And then we'll solve the second one, x minus 2 equals 0. So we'll add 2, and x equals 2. And notice we have two answers. On quadratic equations, since our highest exponent is a 2, that means we're going to have two answers. Let's look at example 2. So we have x squared plus 4x equals 0. So step 1 says to set the equation equal to 0, which it is set equal to 0. Step 2 says to factor. So to factor, we're going to look at this left side, x squared plus 4x. So if you go back to your notes on mixed factoring, we have two terms. So the very first thing under two terms is greatest common factor. And if it helps you, go ahead and put a 1 in front of this x squared. So our greatest common factor for 1 and 4 would be 1, and they both have the variable x. So our greatest common factor is 1x, and then we'll have parentheses, two blanks. So the first blank would be a 1x, and the second blank would be plus 4. Okay, and that's all we can do. We can't factor difference of squares because it's not a difference. So now we're going to take each one of these factors, the first one being 1x, set it equal to 0. The second one is 1x plus 4, set that equal to 0. And then we're going to solve both of them. So on the first one, we'll divide both sides by 1, and x equals 0. There's our first answer. On the second one, we'll subtract 4. So 1x equals negative 4. Divide by 1, x equals negative 4. So your two solutions are x equals 0 and x equals negative 4. Example 3 says x squared plus 4x equals 12. So our first step is to set the equation equal to 0. So we're going to have to do that on this one. So I'm going to draw my line here. And what we're trying to do is get the positive 12 over on the left side with the x squared and the 4x. So we're just going to subtract 12. And if we look on the left side, none of these are like terms. So we're just going to bring everything down. So that gives us x squared plus 4x minus 12 equals, and on the right side of 12 minus 12 equals 0. So now we can move on to the second step, which is to factor. So we're going to factor this part, x squared plus 4x minus 12. So if you go back to your notes on mixed factoring, we have three terms. So the first thing is greatest common factor. Remember, this is a 1, and there's not a greatest common factor there. So the next thing to factor three terms or factor a trinomial is brute force. So we're going to multiply 1 times negative 12, which is negative 12. So factors of 12 are 1 and 12, 2 and 6, and 3 and 4. So we want to multiply together to give us a negative 12 and add together to give us a positive 4. So we're going to have to subtract. So we're going to have one positive and one negative. So if we look at the 2 and the 6, we can say negative 2 times 6 is negative 12. Negative 2 plus 6 gives us positive 4. So we'll make our fractions. 1 on top, since that's in front of the x squared, a negative 2 and a positive 6. So our parentheses would be 1x minus 2, 1x plus 6. Then we're ready for step 3, which is to set each factor equal to 0. So we'll have x minus 2 equals 0, and x plus 6 equals 0. Then we'll solve. So the first one will add 2, and x equals 2. The second one will subtract 6, and x equals negative 6. Alright, so example 4, we have 15x squared plus 19x plus 6 equals 0. So step 1's already taken care of. It's set equal to 0. So then the second step is to factor. So we're going to look at the left side here, 15x squared plus 19x plus 6. So we have 3 terms. The first step is always greatest common factor, and we do not have a greatest common factor here. So that means we're going to use brute force. So 15 times 6, and 15 times 6 is 90. So factors in 90, we'd have 1 in 90, 2 in 45, 3 in 30, 5 in 18, 6 and 15, and 9 and 10. So we need to multiply together to give us 90, add together for the middle term, which is 19. So we'll use 9 and 10. So we'll make our fractions. So 15 on the top, 9 on the bottom of one, 10 on the bottom of the other, and we'll reduce. So 3 will go into the first one, so 3 goes into 15 5 times, and 3 goes into 9 3 times, and then 5 goes into the other, so 5 into 15 3 times, and 5 into 10 2 times. So our factors are 5x plus 3 and 3x plus 2. So our last step now is to set these equal to 0. So 5x plus 3 equals 0, 3x plus 2 equals 0, and solve each one. So on the first one, we'll subtract 3. So 5x equals negative 3. Divide by 5. So x equals negative 3/5 is our first solution. And on the second, subtract 2. So 3x equals negative 2. Divide by 3. And x equals negative 2/3. So our answers are negative 2/3 and negative 3/5. Okay, example 5, we have n squared plus 25 equals 10n. So this one's not set equal to 0, so we're going to have to set this equal to 0 first. So that means we want to get the 10n over with the n squared and the 25. So we're going to subtract 10n from both sides. Okay, and when we write this, we want to put this in descending order because we do not have any like terms here. So we're going to put the n squared first, then the minus 10n, then we'll bring down the plus 25 equals, and 10n minus 10n on the right will give us 0. So now we're just going to look at the left side and we're going to factor this side. So once again we have 3 terms. So I'm going to put a 1 in front of that n squared and start with greatest common factor. And we do not have a greatest common factor. So that means we'll do brute force. So 1 times 25 will give us 25. So factors of 25 are 1 and 25 and 5 and 5. And that's it. So notice we need to multiply to give us a positive 5 and add together to give us negative 10. So we're definitely going to use the 5 and 5, but since we have negative 10 in the center, we're going to make both of these negatives. So our fractions will have 1 over negative 5 and 1 over negative 5. So our parentheses would be 1n minus 5 and 1n minus 5. So we'll set both of them equal to 0. But now notice we have the same thing here. So when we solve them, we'll add 5, and notice we get n equals positive 5. But we're also going to get the same thing on the other side. N equals positive 5 as well. When this happens, when you get the same answer for each of your solutions, this is called a double root. Okay, example 6, why don't you pause the video, try this one on your own, then come back and check and make sure that you have it answered correctly. So we have 36x squared minus 25 equals 0. So we're already set equal to 0, which is good. So our second step is to factor. So we'll look at the left side here, 36x squared minus 25. So we have two terms, so we'll start with greatest common factor, and we do not have a greatest common factor there. So let's try the second thing in two terms, which is difference of squares. So we do have a difference because we have a minus, and we can take square roots of both of those. So this is going to be a difference of squares problem. So the square root of 36 is 6. Square root of x squared, so half of x squared is x. And then the square root of 25 is 5. We'll make 1 a minus, 1 a plus. Now we're going to take both of those and set them equal to 0. So 6x minus 5 equals 0. And 6x plus 5 equals 0 as well. So now we'll solve. So we'll add 5 on the left side. We'll get 6x equals 5. Divide by 6. And x equals 5/6. And then for the second factor, we're going to subtract 5. So this time we get 6x equals negative 5. Divide by 6, and we get x equals negative 5/6. So our two solutions are positive 5/6 and negative 5/6.